In the scorching streets of Phoenix, a 9-year-old homeless girl found a teenager dying in an alley. What she did next would awaken a forgotten oath and bring 200 reformed men to their knees. This story will change how you see invisible people. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. The Arizona sun pressed down on Phoenix like a burning hand, and 9-year-old Lydia Hart moved through the heat with the practiced silence of someone who had learned early that invisibility was survival. She dragged her plastic bag across the cracked sidewalk, her small fingers blackened from aluminum residue. 3 more cans, maybe 4, and she would have enough to buy a sandwich from the dollar menu. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago. It had given up. The alley between Maple and 3rd smelled of diesel and something sweet rotting in a dumpster. Lydia knew every shadow here, every hiding spot, every place where adults did not look twice at a child with tangled hair and clothes 2 sizes too big. She almost stepped on him. The boy lay crumpled against the brick wall, his chest rising in shallow, desperate heaves. His lips had turned the color of a bruised peach, 15, maybe 16 years old, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes that flickered open without seeing. Lydia dropped her bag. The cans scattered across the asphalt with a clatter that echoed off the walls. "Hey," she whispered, crouching beside him. "Hey, wake up." His hand clutched something, a small inhaler. The plastic cracked, the canister empty. He gasped, and the sound was like paper tearing. Lydia's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked around. A man in a stained apron stood at the back door of a restaurant, staring at them with narrowed eyes. "Call an ambulance," she shouted. The man shook his head slowly. "I don't want trouble. He's dying." The door slammed shut. Footsteps approached from the street. 2 women in business suits, walking fast, their heels clicking a rhythm of deliberate avoidance. One glanced down, then away, pulling her companion's arm. "Probably drugs," one muttered. Lydia felt the familiar burn behind her eyes, the rage she had learned to swallow. But this was not about her. This was about the boy whose breath was becoming silence. She remembered the bench near the community center, the one where paramedics sometimes left supplies after treating homeless people who refused hospital trips. She ran. Her bare feet slapped concrete. Her lungs screamed. The bench appeared, and there, tucked beneath it, forgotten, a red first aid kit with a broken clasp. She grabbed it and ran back. The boy had stopped moving. "No, no, no." Lydia tore open the kit. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, a small CPR mask. Nothing that could make him breathe, but she had watched. She had always watched. She tilted his head back the way she had seen a firefighter do once. Clearing his airway, she pressed her small hands against his chest, feeling his ribs beneath her palms, and pushed. Again, again. "Come on," she begged. "Come on, please." A cough, a terrible, rattling cough that sprayed spittle across her face. The boy's eyes flew open, wild with terror, and he sucked in air like a man surfacing from deep water. Lydia sat back on her heels, trembling. Sirens. Finally, sirens. The ambulance screamed around the corner, and suddenly there were adults everywhere. Paramedics with their calm voices and latex gloves, pushing Lydia aside without seeing her. A police officer arrived, asking questions no one could answer. "Who called it in?" one paramedic asked. "Some guy from the restaurant." Another replied, "Said he saw the kid collapse." Lydia pressed herself against the wall, clutching her bag of scattered cans. No one looked at her. No one asked. Across the city, in a garage that smelled of motor oil and honest work, Caleb Mercer's phone buzzed. He wiped his hands on a rag, frowning at the unknown number. "Mr. Mercer?" The voice was clinical, efficient. "Your son Evan has been transported to Phoenix General. He experienced a severe respiratory episode." The wrench slipped from his fingers and clanged against the concrete floor. The sound rang through the garage like a bell. "I'm on my way." He was running before he finished speaking, his boots pounding the pavement, his heart a fist slamming against his chest. The past he had buried, the ink beneath his sleeves, the oaths whispered in dark rooms. None of it mattered now. Only his son, only Evan he did not know, as he drove through red lights with his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, that a 9-year-old girl had given his son back his life. He did not know that she was now walking toward the shelter on 5th Street, her bag half empty, her hands still shaking, her small brass pendant swinging against her collarbone. He did not know that the number etched into that pendant, 47, would change everything. Lydia found her cot in the shelter, curled beneath the thin blanket that smelled of bleach and other people's sorrow, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. No one had thanked her. No one had seen. She closed her eyes and dreamed of nothing. The morning came gray and heavy, the kind of phoenix dawn that promised heat without mercy. Lydia woke before the shelter volunteers began their rounds. Slipping out through the side door with her backpack pressed against her spine, she had a room, not a real room, a storage closet in an abandoned building on Sycamore Street that a kind social worker had helped her secure through a community housing program. It was small, barely larger than a bathroom, but it had a lock. It had walls that kept out the wind. It had been hers for 7 months. The walk took 20 minutes. She counted the cracks in the sidewalk. A game she had invented to make the journey shorter. 412 cracks. Always 412. But when she reached the building, something was wrong. The front door stood open. Voices echoed from inside. Adult voices, sharp and irritated. Lydia's stomach tightened. She climbed the stairs slowly, her bare feet silent on the worn carpet. The door to her room, was open. A woman in a pressed blazer stood inside, tapping something into a tablet. Behind her, a man in an expensive coat examined Lydia's few possessions with unconcealed disgust. "This is ridiculous," the woman said. "The paperwork clearly shows—" "Excuse me." Lydia's voice came out smaller than she intended. "That's my room." The woman turned. Her eyes traveled over Lydia. The dirty clothes, the matted hair, the bare feet, and her lips curled. "I don't know what you're talking about." She held up a folder. "We have documentation showing this unit was assigned to Mr. and Mrs. Patterson 3 weeks ago. You must be confused." "I'm not confused." Lydia stepped forward. "I've lived here for 7 months. Ask anyone." The man laughed. It was not a kind sound. "Ask who?" "The rats." "Perhaps you should speak to the building manager," the woman said, already turning away. "We have legitimate paperwork. You have nothing." The door closed in Lydia's face. She stood in the hallway, her heart pounding, her vision blurring. The lock clicked from inside. Her lock, the one that had made her feel safe. She knocked. "Please, my things are in there. My blanket, my—" "Go away, or we'll call the police," the man's voice called through the door. "Squatters have no rights here." Lydia pressed her palm against the wood. On the other side, she heard them laughing. She turned and walked down the hallway. A door cracked open. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who always smelled like lavender and sometimes left tortillas outside Lydia's door. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Lydia whispered, "they took my room. Can you tell someone that I live there?" The old woman's eyes darted toward the closed door, then back to Lydia. Fear flickered across her face. "I'm sorry, mija," she whispered. "I can't get involved. They have lawyers, papers. I don't want trouble." The door closed. Lydia walked past 3 more apartments. She knocked. No one answered, though she heard movement behind the doors, saw shadows passing beneath them. At the end of the hallway, the building manager's office stood dark and empty. A sign taped to the window read, "Under New Management, Inquiries to Apex Property Group." The name meant nothing to her, but the coldness in her chest, that, she understood, she was outside again before she realized she was crying. The tears came silently, the way she had taught herself, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. The sun climbed higher. The city moved around her in its indifferent rhythm. Cars honking, people rushing, the world continuing as if a 9-year-old girl had not just lost the only safe place she had ever known. Lydia found an alley behind a Chinese restaurant where the dumpster blocked the wind. She sat with her back against the brick wall, her backpack clutched to her chest, and tried to remember how to breathe. In her pocket, the brass pendant pressed against her thigh. She did not know why she had kept it all these years. A gift from a woman whose face she could barely remember, whose voice had been soft and sad. She pulled it out now, running her thumb over the raised numbers. 4, 7. The metal was warm from her body heat, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt less alone. The alley behind Wong's kitchen had become Lydia's temporary kingdom, a narrow strip of shadow between dumpsters where no one thought to look. Night had fallen over Phoenix, and with it came the sounds she knew by heart. Distant sirens, the bass thump of a passing car, the rustle of rats negotiating trash. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her backpack serving as both pillow and protection, and finally allowed herself to examine the only thing she had left. The pendant was smaller than a quarter, tarnished brass with edges worn smooth by years of handling. The number 47 had been stamped into its surface, each digit precise and deliberate. On the back, someone had scratched letters into the metal, faded now, but still readable if she tilted it toward the streetlight. Mercer. Lydia closed her eyes and tried to remember. A woman, brown hair streaked with gray, hands that shook when she pressed the pendant into Lydia's palm. Keep this safe, little one. When you need help, real help, find the name on the back. Tell them the number. She had been 5 years old, maybe 4. The memory was soft at the edges, like a photograph left in the sun. Who are you? Lydia had asked. The woman's smile had been the saddest thing she had ever seen. Someone who should have done more. And then she was gone, swallowed by the crowd at the bus station. And Lydia had clutched the pendant through 7 foster homes and 3 shelters and 1 brief, terrible month on the streets before the social worker found her and helped her secure the room she had now lost. A voice broke through her thoughts. You're the one who saved that kid, aren't you? Lydia's head snapped up. A man stood at the mouth of the alley, older, with a graying beard and a grocery cart full of carefully organized belongings. She recognized him from the shelter. Marcus, they called him. He had been a teacher once, before everything fell apart. What kid? She asked carefully. The one in the alley yesterday. The ambulance. I saw you running with that first aid kit. Marcus settled onto an overturned crate, keeping a respectful distance. Word travels fast in our world, little one. Some folks are talking about it. Lydia said nothing. Also heard about what happened at your building. His voice softened. The Apex people have been doing that all over the neighborhood. Fake paperwork, intimidation. They take the units, flip them to out-of-state investors. Happened to my friend Denise last month. Nobody does anything because nobody believes people like us. Why are you telling me this? Marcus shrugged. Because you did something good, and the universe repaid you with something bad. Doesn't seem right. He stood, adjusting his cart. There's a volunteer at the shelter. Sister Maria. She's been helping people fight back. Might be worth talking to her. He was gone before Lydia could respond, his cart rattling into the darkness. She looked down at the pendant again. The name on the back seemed to pulse in the dim light. Mercer. Her fingers found her phone, a battered flip phone with a cracked screen, kept charged at the shelter for emergencies. She had never used it for anything but checking the time. The number was in her memory, recited so many times it had become rhythm. The woman at the bus station had made her repeat it until she could say it in her sleep. 602-555-4747. Lydia's thumb hovered over the keypad. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What if they don't answer? What if they're dead? What if it was all just a crazy woman's fantasy? She pressed the numbers anyway. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. A click, a voice. Male, tired, rough with something that sounded like recent tears. Hello? Lydia's throat closed. She forced the words out, small and thin. My name is Lydia. I have a pendant. It says 47, and the name on the back. It says Mercer. Silence. Long, terrible silence. Then the voice changed, sharpened, became something between a gasp and a prayer. Where are you? Lydia told him. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming. The line went dead. Lydia stared at the phone in her hand, her pulse roaring in her ears. Somewhere across the city, she heard the distant rumble of an engine starting. She did not know that the man on the other end of the call had just seen his son breathe on his own for the first time in 18 hours. She did not know that the number 47 meant something so deep and old that grown men would weep at the sound of it. She only knew that someone, finally, was coming. Caleb Mercer's hands trembled on the steering wheel. He had not felt this particular tremor in 15 years. Not since the night he walked away from everything he had ever known and swore on his mother's grave to become someone his son could be proud of. The hospital room was quiet behind him. Evan slept, his breathing finally steady, the machines humming their mechanical lullabies. The doctors had used words like mysterious contamination and tampered medication, and somewhere in the back of Caleb's mind, a cold suspicion had begun to form. But that could wait. Right now, all that mattered was the voice on the phone. Lydia. Pendant. 47. The memories hit him in waves as he drove through the darkened streets. A man named David Hart. Quiet, serious, with eyes that saw too much. A public defender who took cases no one else would touch. 15 years ago, when Caleb was 23 and stupid and facing a murder charge for a crime he did not commit, David Hart had been the only one who believed him. I don't care about your past, Hart had said. I care about the truth, and the truth is, you were set up. 3 months of investigation. Threats to Hart's family that he never mentioned until later. A corrupt detective exposed. Caleb's name cleared. On the last day of the trial, Hart had pressed something into Caleb's palm. A brass pendant, worn and warm. You're part of the 47 now, Hart had said. It's an old tradition, started by my grandfather, passed through generations. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. We pay forward the grace we receive. I don't deserve grace, Caleb had whispered. None of us do. That's what makes it grace. Hart had died 3 years later. Car accident, they said. Caleb had always wondered. But Hart had a daughter, a little girl he had spoken of with such tenderness that his voice would crack. Lydia, named after his grandmother. The child had vanished into the system after his death. Caleb had tried to find her once, years ago, but the trail went cold. He had assumed she was safe somewhere. Growing up in a foster family, maybe even adopted, he had assumed wrong. The alley behind Wong's kitchen smelled of grease and garbage. Caleb parked his truck at the curb and stepped out, his boots crunching on broken glass. Lydia, she emerged from the shadows like a ghost. Small, thin, dirty, with eyes that held the kind of wariness no child should know. The brass pendant gleamed against her chest. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. She had her father's eyes, that same steady gaze that saw through pretense and found the truth beneath. Mr. Mercer. Her voice was barely a whisper. Yeah. He crouched down slowly, keeping his distance, making himself small. Yeah, that's me, your daddy. He saved my life once. Did you know that? Lydia shook her head. I was in trouble, bad trouble. Everyone else gave up on me, but he didn't. Caleb's voice cracked. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and he gave me this. He reached beneath his shirt and pulled out his own pendant, identical to hers. The number 47 caught the streetlight and gleamed. I've been looking for you for a long time, Lydia. I didn't know where you were. I'm sorry it took so long. Something shifted in her eyes. A crack in the armor, a glimpse of the child beneath the survivor. Some people took my room, she said. They had fake papers. Nobody would help me. Caleb felt the old anger rising, the fury he had learned to control but never quite extinguished. He breathed through it. We're going to fix that, he said. But first, I need to make some calls. There are others like me, people your father helped, people who owe their lives to the 47. And when they hear your name, Lydia, he stood and pulled out his phone. The first call went to Marcus in Tucson, then Elena in Flagstaff, then Jerome in Albuquerque. By midnight, the messages were spreading across 7 states, passing through garages and construction sites and truck stops, through sober living houses and community kitchens, through all the places where men and women who had once been lost now built careful, honest lives. The girl who carries the 47 needs help. David Hart's daughter, Phoenix. Now, engines started in the darkness. Headlights cut through the desert night. Camionettes and sedans and weathered motorcycles began converging on a city that did not yet know what was coming. Lydia sat in the passenger seat of Caleb's truck, wrapped in his jacket, watching the stars through the window. How many people are coming? She asked. Caleb checked his phone. The messages were still arriving. Confirmations. Locations eat us. Enough, he said quietly. Enough to make things right. They arrived with the morning light, one by one, then in pairs, then in clusters. Battered pickup trucks and modest sedans pulling into the empty lot beside the community center on Sycamore Street. Men and women in work clothes and steel-toed boots, with calloused hands and weathered faces and eyes that had seen too much and decided to see differently. Lydia watched from the window of Caleb's truck, her breath fogging the glass. Who are all these people? She whispered. Family, Caleb said. Not by blood, by something stronger. A woman approached the truck, tall, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that might have been carved from desert stone. She wore a paramedic's uniform and moved with the efficiency of someone who had saved lives for decades. Caleb, she nodded through the window. This the girl. Elena, meet Lydia. Lydia, this is Elena Vasquez. She runs the EMT training program in Flagstaff now. 30 years ago, she was someone else, Elena said firmly. Someone who made mistakes and got a second chance. She crouched beside Lydia's window, her expression softening. Your father helped my son when no one else would. Got him into a rehabilitation program. Paid for his treatment out of his own pocket. My son is a nurse now. Has 3 kids of his own. Lydia did not know what to say. She had never known her father had touched so many lives. By noon, the lot was full, 217 people, by Caleb's count. Though more were still arriving, they gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices, their movements careful and deliberate. No one raised a voice. No one made threats. They simply existed, a mass of humanity that could not be ignored. The neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared on her balcony, her eyes wide. Other faces emerged in windows along the street, curious, wary, slowly understanding. An elderly man in a wheelchair rolled out of his apartment and stopped at the edge of the gathering.
"Are you the people I've been hearing about? The ones who fight the Apex people?" Caleb shook his head. "We don't fight anyone. We just make sure the truth gets heard." "My granddaughter got evicted last month," the old man said.
Same fake paperwork, same intimidation. She's living in her car now. Elena wrote down his name. By afternoon, they had collected 47 stories, 47 families displaced by the same company, the same forged documents, the same cold bureaucratic cruelty. The number was not lost on anyone. Inside the community center, tables had been set up and covered with boxes of documents. A man named Jerome, bald, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses perched incongruously on his nose, sorted through paperwork with the precision of a forensic accountant, because that was what he was now, after serving his time and rebuilding his life one honest tax return at a time. "Here," he said, jabbing a finger at a spreadsheet. "The signatures don't match. Look at these deed transfers, 3 different handwriting styles, but supposedly all signed by the same person." "That's fraud," said a young woman beside him. She wore a law school sweatshirt and took notes furiously. "I'm interning at the legal aid office. This is exactly what we need." Lydia moved through the crowd like a small ghost, overwhelmed by the attention, by the hands that reached out to touch her shoulder gently, by the voices that spoke her father's name with reverence. "You're David's girl," an old woman said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He represented my husband when nobody else would. Got him out of prison 2 years early. Let him die at home with his family. Your father was a good man," another said. "Best man I ever knew." Lydia had never thought of her father that way. She had been too young when he died, and the years since had been about survival, not memory. But now, standing in the middle of this strange army of redemption, she felt the shape of him forming around her, the man who had seen something worth saving in people the world had discarded. Late in the day, Caleb found her sitting alone on the steps of the community center, staring at the pendant in her palm. "You okay?" he asked. "I didn't know," she said quietly, "about any of this. I just thought he was my dad." Caleb sat beside her. "He was. That's the thing, Lydia. He was just your dad, doing what he thought was right. And look what grew from that." She leaned against his shoulder, just for a moment, the first voluntary contact she had allowed in years. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Caleb said, "we find out what really happened to my son, and to your room, and to everyone else who got hurt, and then we make sure it never happens again." In the window of Lydia's old building, a curtain twitched. The woman in the pressed blazer watched the gathering below, her tablet clutched to her chest, her expression no longer quite so confident. Something was changing in Phoenix. She could feel it in the air. The conference room at the community center had been transformed into a war room of paper and purpose. Jerome had commandeered the largest table, spreading documents across its surface like a general planning a campaign. Beside him, the law student, Maria, her name was, 3rd year at Arizona State, highlighted inconsistencies in the property transfers, with a yellow marker that squeaked against the page. "This is bigger than we thought," Jerome said, his voice grim. "Apex Property Group isn't just running a housing scam. They're connected to at least 3 other companies. Shell corporations, all of them, and one of those shells." He held up a printout. The logo at the top was a medical caduceus, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. They manufacture generic medications for low-income clinics. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. Evan's inhaler was generic. The doctor said someone tampered with the formula. "I don't think it was tampering," Maria said slowly. "I think it was cost-cutting, diluting medication to increase profit margins. There have been complaints filed, but they keep getting dismissed, and the people who file them get evicted," Jerome finished, "lose their homes, end up homeless, discredited, invisible." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The same people who had stolen Lydia's room had endangered Evan's life. The same corporation that preyed on the vulnerable was poisoning them at the same time. Lydia sat in the corner, her legs pulled up on the chair, listening to everything. When she spoke, her voice was small but certain. I saw someone. Every head turned. The day before the boy collapsed. In the alley there was a man. He was wearing a suit, and he had a bag from a pharmacy. He was putting something in the dumpster. I thought it was just trash. What did he look like? Caleb asked. White hair, red tie. He had a pin on his jacket, like a gold circle with a snake. Maria's fingers flew across her laptop. A moment later, she turned the screen around. A corporate headshot. A man with white hair and a carefully practiced smile. Theodore Marsh, Chief Financial Officer of Meridian Pharmaceuticals. That's him, Lydia said. The room erupted in murmurs. Caleb raised a hand for silence. We can't go after him directly. We don't have authority, but we can make sure the people who do have authority can't ignore this. Elena stepped forward. The community board has a public hearing scheduled for next week. Property disputes, health complaints. It's supposed to be routine, but if we show up with enough evidence, enough witnesses, enough people, they'll have to listen, Jerome said. Over the next 3 days, the community center became a hive of activity. Volunteers organized files. Medical professionals reviewed case histories of patients who had experienced mysterious worsening symptoms. Former residents of Apex-controlled buildings came forward with their stories, and the 200 reformados, that was what the neighbors had started calling them, a term of respect rather than fear, worked alongside everyone else. They carried boxes and made coffee runs and drove elderly witnesses to appointments. They used the skills they had learned in their old lives, the ability to read people, to track patterns, to recognize deception, in service of something clean. One afternoon, 2 cars pulled up outside the community center. The woman in the pressed blazer stepped out, flanked by a man in an expensive suit. They did not approach, just watched from across the street. Their faces expressionless, Caleb walked to the edge of the lot and stood there, arms crossed, looking back at them. After a long moment, the woman turned and got back in her car. They drove away. That's interesting, Elena murmured. They're scared, Caleb said. Good, but fear made people dangerous. That night, when Lydia went to check on Mrs. Rodriguez, she found a note taped to the old woman's door. It had no signature, only 2 words. Stop talking, Mrs. Rodriguez's hands shook as she showed it to Lydia. Maybe we should forget all this, mija. Maybe it's not worth the trouble. Lydia looked at the note, then at the frightened woman who had been kind to her when no one else was. My father didn't give up on people, she said quietly. Even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, he believed that the truth mattered. She took Mrs. Rodriguez's hand. And the truth is, you matter. We all do. Something shifted in the old woman's eyes, a spark of the courage she had thought she lost. Okay, she whispered. Okay, mija. I'll testify. The investigation deepened as the night crept over Phoenix, bringing with it a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. In the basement of the community center, Jerome and Maria worked by lamplight, surrounded by towers of documents that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. Cross-referencing had revealed a web of corruption so intricate it took their breath away. 16 families, Maria said, her voice hoarse from hours of reading. 16 families evicted from their homes in the last 8 months. Every single one of them had filed complaints against either Apex Property Group or Meridian Pharmaceuticals. It's a silencing operation, Jerome replied. You make them homeless, discredit them, scatter them across the city. Who's going to believe a person without an address, without documentation? Upstairs, Caleb sat with Evan, who had been discharged from the hospital that morning. The boy was still pale, still weak, but his eyes were clear and angry. They did this to me on purpose, he said. To get to you. Caleb shook his head. They did this because they're greedy and careless. They didn't know about our connection to any of this. It was random cruelty, Evan. That's almost worse. Then let's make sure it isn't random anymore. Evan's jaw set with a determination that reminded Caleb painfully of himself at that age. I want to help. Lydia appeared in the doorway, her face troubled. There's someone outside. He's been sitting in a car across the street for 3 hours. They went to the window together. A dark sedan, engine off, windows tinted as they watched. The interior light flickered on briefly, illuminating a face. The same white hair, the same cold eyes. Theodore Marsh. He made no move to approach. He just sat there, watching, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He wants us to know he's watching, Caleb said. He wants us to be afraid. Are we? Lydia asked. Caleb looked down at her. This small, fierce girl who had saved his son's life with nothing but determination and a battered first aid kit. He thought about her father, who had walked into courtrooms full of people who wanted him to fail and argued for justice anyway. No, he said. We're not. He walked outside, alone, crossing the street with steady steps. The sedan's window lowered as he approached. Mr. Mercer. Marsh's voice was silk over gravel. I was hoping we could have a conversation. About what? About the wisdom of knowing when to stop. Marsh smiled without warmth. You've assembled quite a little army here. Former gang members, recovering addicts, ex-convicts, very inspiring. But the people I work for, they have lawyers, resources, the ability to make problems disappear. Is that a threat? It's information. Marsh flicked ash onto the pavement. Walk away, take the girl, leave Phoenix. In exchange, I'll ensure that no one looks too closely at your past. The assault charge from 2004, for instance. The one that got dismissed due to procedural irregularities. I'm sure Evan would hate to learn that his father— My son knows exactly who I am, Caleb interrupted. What I was, what I became, we don't keep secrets from each other. Marsh's smile faltered, just slightly. You think you're going to win this? He asked. You think a bunch of reformed criminals and homeless children are going to bring down a corporation worth billions? Caleb leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. I think we're going to tell the truth, and I think you're terrified of what happens when people start listening. He straightened up and walked back toward the community center. Behind him, the sedan's engine roared to life. The car pulled away, tires squealing. Inside, Elena met him at the door. What did he want? To scare us. Caleb watched the taillights disappear around the corner, but he made a mistake. What's that? He showed up personally, which means the people above him are getting nervous, which means we're getting close. That night, the community center stayed lit until dawn. The final pieces of evidence were assembled. Witness statements were notarized. A timeline was constructed, meticulous and damning. And in a small room upstairs, Lydia sat with Evan, 2 children bound by circumstance and something deeper. Are you scared? He asked. She thought about it for a moment. A little, but my dad used to say that courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Evan nodded slowly. I like that. Me too. Outside the window, the first light of morning touched the rooftops of Phoenix. The day of the hearing had arrived. The community center had transformed into something that pulsed with barely contained energy. Long tables lined the main hall, covered with neatly organized folders and labeled boxes. The smell of fresh coffee competed with the fragrance of tortillas warming on a griddle in the corner, where Mrs. Delgado, a grandmother who had lost her apartment to Apex 3 months ago, worked with quiet determination. Everyone needs to eat, she said when Caleb tried to thank her. Justice comes better on a full stomach. The 200 had gathered in the parking lot as the sun rose, receiving their final instructions from Elena. They would not enter the hearing en masse. That would be too easy to dismiss as intimidation. Instead, they would be scattered throughout the crowd, ordinary citizens attending a public meeting, their presence a silent reminder that the invisible had finally decided to be seen. Inside, Jerome reviewed the evidence one final time with Maria and a team of volunteer lawyers who had arrived overnight from 3 different states. Pro bono, all of them. Word had spread through legal networks about what was happening in Phoenix, and people wanted to help. The key is the medication records, Jerome explained, spreading documents across the table. We can prove that Meridian altered the formulations without FDA approval, but more importantly, we can show that every family who complained was subsequently targeted by Apex for eviction. It's a conspiracy charge waiting to happen, Maria said. The question is whether we can get the board to take it seriously enough to trigger a formal investigation. We will, said a new voice. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway, older, with steel-gray hair and a face that bore the unmistakable marks of someone who had spent decades fighting bureaucratic battles. She wore a simple suit and carried a battered leather briefcase. Margaret Chen, she said, extending her hand to Caleb. Former federal prosecutor. Your father represented my brother once. Lydia. Got him out of a situation that could have destroyed his life. Lydia stepped forward, her eyes wide. You knew my dad. Everyone in Arizona legal circles knew David Hart. Margaret's voice softened. He was the conscience none of us could afford to have. I'm here to honor his memory, She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've been tracking Meridian for 2 years. Never had enough evidence to move forward. But combined with what you've gathered, she smiled grimly. We've got them. The afternoon was spent in preparation. Witnesses rehearsed their statements, not to create false testimony, but to help them tell their truth clearly and calmly. The lawyers reviewed procedural guidelines. The reformados made sure everyone knew where to sit, when to speak, how to conduct themselves. And through it all, Lydia moved like a small thread binding everything together. She brought water to thirsty witnesses. She held hands with elderly residents who trembled with nervousness. She listened to stories that had never been told, and simply by listening, made them true. As evening approached, Evan found her sitting on the steps, staring at the setting sun. Big day tomorrow, he said, lowering himself carefully beside her. He was still weak, still healing. Yeah, nervous. She turned the brass pendant over in her fingers. I keep thinking about what my dad would say, if he was here. What do you think he'd say? Lydia was quiet for a long moment. I think he'd say that all of this, is what the 47 was always supposed to be. Not just protecting people who can't protect themselves, but helping them protect each other. Evan nodded. Sounds right to me. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow, they would face the machinery of power that had crushed so many before them. Tomorrow, they would speak truth to those who had grown comfortable with lies. But tonight, in the warmth of a community that had chosen to stand together, there was something almost like hope. The City Hall of Phoenix had never seen anything like it. They began arriving at dawn, ordinary people in ordinary clothes, carrying folders and notebooks and the weight of stories too long silenced. By the time the doors opened, the line stretched around the block. Some had driven through the night, some had walked from neighborhoods across the city. All of them were there for the same reason. The truth was finally going to be told. Inside the main chamber, the community board members took their seats with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed annoyance. These hearings were supposed to be routine. Zoning disputes, permit applications, the tedious machinery of local governance. No one had warned them about the crowd. Theodore Marsh sat in the front row, surrounded by 3 lawyers in identical gray suits. His face was a mask of composure, but his fingers drummed a nervous rhythm on his briefcase. Caleb and Elena took seats near the back, positioning themselves where they could see everything. Lydia sat between them, Mrs. Rodriguez on one side and Evan on the other. The brass pendant rested against her chest, warm with her heartbeat. The board chair, a heavy man with tired eyes, called the session to order. We have several matters to address today, he began. First on the agenda. Point of order. Margaret Chen rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. I'm Margaret Chen, representing a coalition of residents affected by fraud allegedly perpetrated by Apex Property Group and Meridian Pharmaceuticals. We request that this matter take precedence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Ms. Chen, the chair said slowly, this hearing is not scheduled to address corporate fraud allegations. With respect, Mr. Chairman, the evidence we're about to present affects housing, public health, and the safety of Phoenix residents. This board has jurisdiction over all 3. One of Marsh's lawyers stood. This is a transparent attempt to hijack public proceedings for a political agenda. My client, your client, Margaret interrupted, has been systematically evicting tenants who filed complaints about contaminated medication. We have documentation linking Apex to Meridian, evidence of falsified property documents, and testimony from over 40 affected families. She held up the folder Jerome had prepared, thick with highlighted pages and tabbed dividers. Shall I continue, Mr. Chairman? Or would you prefer to explain to the packed chamber why this doesn't warrant your attention? The chair's gaze swept across the crowd. The elderly faces, the young mothers with children on their laps, the working men and women who had taken days off jobs they could not afford to miss, and scattered among them, quiet and patient, the 200 who had traveled from across the country to stand witness. Proceed, Mrs. Chen. What followed was 3 hours of testimony that stripped away every layer of deception. First came the residents, Mrs. Rodriguez, her voice steadier than anyone expected, describing the night strangers appeared with false paperwork, and police refused to intervene. Mr. Thompson, a retired postal worker, detailing how his asthma medication suddenly stopped working. The same month he filed a complaint about rent increases. Then the experts, doctors who had noticed patterns of worsening health outcomes in low-income neighborhoods, pharmacists who had flagged inconsistencies in Meridian's products and been ignored, then the data, Jerome presenting spreadsheets and timelines, drawing connections so clear that even the board members' skepticism began to crack. And finally, Evan. He walked to the podium slowly, still pale, still healing. But when he spoke, his voice filled the chamber. I almost died because someone decided my life was worth less than their profit margin. I'm 15 years old. I had to use an inhaler every day. And someone in this room, decided to cut costs by diluting the medication that kept me breathing. He turned and looked directly at Theodore Marsh. I see you there. I know what you did, and I want you to know something. The chamber held its breath. I'm still here. We're all still here, and we're not going away. Marsh's composure finally cracked. He whispered furiously to his lawyers, his face reddening, but there was nowhere to run. Every exit was blocked by people who had come to hear the truth. The board chair leaned forward, his expression transformed. In light of the evidence presented today, he said slowly, this board is initiating an emergency investigation into the practices of Apex Property Group and Meridian Pharmaceuticals. All eviction proceedings linked to either company are hereby suspended pending review, and I am personally requesting that the State Attorney General open a criminal inquiry. The chamber erupted. Not in cheers, that would come later, but in something deeper. The sound of 200 people exhaling the fear they had carried for years. Lydia watched Theodore Marsh being escorted out by his lawyers, his shoulders hunched, his power evaporating with every step. She thought about all the people he had hurt, all the lives he had treated as acceptable losses, and she thought about her father, the man who had spent his life fighting for people like her, who had created the 47 precisely for moments like this. We did it, Dad, she thought. We finally did it. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity and healing. The state investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Meridian's records were subpoenaed, Apex's corporate veil was pierced, and a steady stream of evidence flowed into prosecutors' hands. Theodore Marsh resigned in disgrace. 3 other executives were indicted. The families who had been illegally evicted began the slow process of reclaiming their homes. But the real transformation happened in the neighborhood around Sycamore Street. The community center, long abandoned, was reborn. The 200 came back. Not all of them, but enough. They arrived with tools and materials, with skills learned in construction jobs and trade schools, with the particular dedication of people given a chance to build rather than destroy. Lydia's room was the first project. They tore out the moldy walls and replaced them with fresh drywall that smelled of new beginnings. They sanded the floors until they gleamed. Elena painted the ceiling a soft sky blue. Because she remembered Lydia mentioning once that she had never seen the ocean, Mrs. Rodriguez contributed curtains sewn from fabric she had been saving for years. Mr. Thompson built a small bookshelf from reclaimed wood. The neighborhood children made drawings that were taped to the walls like a gallery of hope. On the day it was finished, Lydia stood in the doorway, unable to speak. The room was small, smaller than some closets in wealthy homes, but it was hers, really hers, with a lock on the door and her name on the mailbox, and people who would notice if she disappeared. Evan stood beside her, his breathing strong and clear. The new medication had been provided by a pharmacy program that Margaret Chen had helped establish, ensuring that low-income families would never again be vulnerable to corporate greed. "What do you think?" he asked. Lydia walked to the window and looked out at the street. Below, she could see the community gathering for the celebration, tables set up with food, children playing, the 200 mingling with neighbors who had once looked at them with suspicion and now clasped their hands in gratitude. "It's perfect," she said. The ceremony was held in the courtyard of the community center, now officially renamed the David Hart Community Resource Center. A small plaque near the entrance bore his photograph and a simple inscription, "He saw people others refused to see." Caleb stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, the reformados he had once led down darker paths, the neighbors he had learned to serve, the children who represented futures he had helped protect. 15 years ago, he began, I was given a second chance. A man named David Hart looked at me and saw something worth saving. He didn't ask for anything in return. He just told me to pass it forward. He reached into his pocket. The 47 was never about a number. It was about a promise that we would protect those who couldn't protect themselves, that we would use our second chances to give second chances to others. He descended from the podium and walked toward Lydia, who stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the original pendant still hanging around her neck. "Your father gave me this," Caleb said, holding up a newly minted pendant. Polished brass, the number 47 etched deep into its surface. "He told me that someday I'd know who to give it to." He placed it in her palm. "The 47 isn't mine to lead anymore. It belongs to the next generation, to kids like you and Evan, who know what it means to fight for something bigger than yourselves." Lydia looked at the pendant, then at the crowd watching her. 200 faces, some weathered by hard years, some young and hopeful, all of them looking at her like she mattered. For the first time she could remember, she did not feel invisible. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll try to be worthy of it." Caleb smiled. "You already are." The celebration continued until the stars came out. Music and laughter and the particular joy of people who had found each other after long wandering. Lydia danced with Mrs. Rodriguez. Evan taught a group of younger kids how to identify constellations. The 200 told stories of their journeys, their stumbles, their redemptions, and somewhere in the crowd, a small girl watched it all with wide eyes. A foster child from across the city, brought by a social worker who had heard about what was happening on Sycamore Street. She wore clothes that did not fit, and shoes that were falling apart, and her expression held the familiar wariness of someone who had learned early that the world was not safe. Lydia noticed her. Of course she did. She had once been that girl. She walked over and crouched down, just as Caleb had done for her in the alley behind Wong's kitchen. "Hi," she said. "What's your name?" "Sophia." "I'm Lydia. Are you hungry? There's really good tortillas." Sophia nodded slowly, still wary. Lydia held out her hand. The brass pendant gleamed in the lamplight. "Come on," she said. "You're safe here." And in that moment, as one small hand reached out to take another, the promise of the 47 was renewed once more, a circle of protection passing from one generation to the next. A testament to the impossible power of grace. The night deepened over Phoenix, but the lights of the community center burned on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to choose compassion over cruelty. But tonight, there was only this, a family of choice, gathered in the warmth of belonging, celebrating the truth that had set them free. Sometimes the smallest hands reach out first, and the world changes forever. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Every act of kindness creates ripples we never see. Who in your life deserves to know they matter? Would you like another story?